It was my birthday, but my family simply forgot. They were so busy with their own lives, their daily routines and commitments, that none of them remembered to wish me a happy birthday. It was a silent pain, a pain I didn't want to admit, but it was there, consuming me little by little. Before we dive into this story, tell me, where are you watching from? Put your city or country in the comments and take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel because we have an incredible new story waiting for you tomorrow, made especially for you. The day started like any other. I woke up, got ready, made my breakfast, and thought that maybe, just maybe, someone would remember. Maybe my brother, who always forgets dates, or my mom, who always said my birthday was a special day. But as the hours passed, the silence became deafening. No messages, no phone calls, no sign that they knew today was my day. I know what you might be thinking. It's just a birthday. Why is it so important? But what I wanted, more than any gift or party, was to be seen. I wanted to feel important. I wanted the people I love most to show me they care. That's not too much to ask, right? But on that day, it felt like I was invisible. I waited until late afternoon. I hoped that, at least by the end of the day, my mom or dad would call me, or even that my brother would send me a message. Nothing. The loneliness seemed even deeper that day, as the world around me kept turning while I felt stuck, ignored. It was a bitter feeling, a feeling of not being important enough to those who should be the first to celebrate my existence. I knew it was just another day, but for me, it was a reflection of something bigger, the feeling that maybe I would never really be seen, and that, in a way, hurt me more than any words I could hear. At that moment, something inside me broke. I knew I couldn't go on feeling invisible. I decided it was time to do something, to change the narrative, because if they didn't see me, maybe it was time for me to make myself noticed, but not in a way that was obvious or expected. I didn't want simple recognition, I wanted a lesson, and more than anything, I wanted to feel valued for who I really was, not for what I did or what others expected of me. I made a decision. I would do something that would undoubtedly get their attention, something no one would forget. But it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about creating drama. It was about putting myself first, about making myself heard in a way that was powerful, but also meaningful. So that night, I decided to write a letter to each member of my family, and not just any letter, but one that spoke about how I really felt. I wrote about the years of silent struggle, about the moments when I felt lost among others, about the forgotten birthdays and unexpressed feelings. I spoke of my loneliness and search for acceptance, but also of the understanding I was beginning to have about myself. When I finished, I looked at the words I had written and realized that it wasn't just my family I wanted these words to reach. It was for me too. It was a reminder that even when we feel invisible, we can be our own heroes. That letter wasn't just a complaint, but an affirmation of who I was, what I needed, and what I hoped for. It was an affirmation of self-worth. The next day, the letter was delivered, not in a dramatic or aggressive way, but as something that seemed simple, yet carried a much greater weight. I left each letter where I knew each of my family members would find it, on the dining room table, on the office chair, on the refrigerator. It was an invitation for them to reflect on how I felt, on the impact their actions or lack of action had on me. When everyone got home that night, the atmosphere was tense. They didn't know how to react. My mother was the first to open the letter. Her expression changed from surprise to a slight blush on her face. I saw the guilt in her eyes, the realization that something was wrong, that something had been neglected for so long. My father, the next to read, was silent. He was able to understand the depth of my words and the pain I carried. He didn't say anything, but he looked at me like never before, with a look that spoke louder than any apology could say. And then my brother, he read it, closed the letter, and looked at me, as if trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't know, he said, with a look of regret. I never realized how much this affected you. There, in that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. I saw how the others were so immersed in their own lives that they didn't realize how much they had left me behind. I saw how, as much as they loved me, there was an emotional distance that needed to be overcome, and more importantly, I saw how a simple gesture on my part, a letter full of unspoken words, was enough to make them finally see me, finally hear me. But what I wanted wasn't their guilt. What I wanted was simply to be seen, and that was something that began to happen in that moment. Not only did they acknowledge that they had left me behind, but they also understood the value of being present for others, not just physically, but emotionally. Now, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, the only way to be seen is to put yourself in a position where people can't ignore your pain, your presence. It wasn't about waiting for others to automatically notice. I needed to take a step forward, put my emotions into words, and make it clear that my presence was just as valuable as theirs. In the days that followed, my family became more present. We started talking more, celebrating more, being more aware of each other, not because I forced it, but because I decided not to be invisible anymore. Because in doing so, I also challenged them to be more aware of each other's needs. It was a moment of change for all of us, and the real lesson I learned was that we often need to make ourselves heard in ways that aren't obvious. We need to show our pain and our needs clearly so that others can see us. We shouldn't expect people to see us automatically because they are often so caught up in their own lives that they simply don't notice. I also learned that the key is not revenge or constant demands, but self-knowledge and communication. It was from this experience that I began to understand myself better, to value who I am and what I need to be happy. Sometimes we are the first to forget our own worth, but by recognizing it, we can begin to demand in a positive way what we deserve: love, attention, and respect. Now, whenever my birthday approaches, I no longer worry about what others will do for me. Instead, I celebrate how much I have learned to value myself, and that was undoubtedly the biggest lesson I learned that day. The day that should have been special, the day that should have been celebrated with love and attention, finally passed. The pain of being forgotten remained with me, but what struck me most was how my own perception of myself changed in the process. I already knew on a deep level that the people around us cannot guess what we are feeling. They cannot understand our emotional needs unless we communicate them clearly. This simple fact, which was actually quite complex, was engraved in my mind. But in the days that followed, something began to happen. It was as if my action, the act of making myself heard in a way that no one expected, had created a rift in everything that was comfortable and routine. I didn't want to create drama, and in fact that wasn't the goal, but I couldn't deny that my attitude had a profound effect on everyone around me. In the days that followed, things began to change, albeit tentatively. My mother, who had always been so busy and sometimes distant, began to show up more. She started asking how I was doing more often, not just physically, but emotionally. She, who had always been the one who took care of everything in the house, suddenly started looking at me differently. It was no longer about daily chores or what was being done around the house. It was about us. I can't deny that the pain of being forgotten on my birthday never completely went away, but what followed was a healing process that I didn't know was underway. My mother, in reaching out to me, not only offered me the support I wanted at that moment, but also offered me something even more valuable: a space to express my needs. I had never asked for attention, never spoken directly about how much the lack of emotional connection hurt me, and suddenly, that conversation became possible. However, the rebuilding process was not instantaneous. My family, especially my father, took a little longer to adjust. He, a serious man, always more focused on work, was more reticent in dealing with the raw emotion I had placed before him. When he read my letter, he remained silent for longer than I expected. I thought he would say something, anything, to try to smooth things over, but instead, he remained silent. He looked at the letter, then looked at me, as if trying to understand what was going on inside his own mind. It was when he finally broke the silence that I realized the real impact of my action. He said, "I never realized how much you were suffering from not being seen. I never realized that the lack of attention at important moments could affect you so much. I thought that because we were here, everything was fine." And those words hit me like a blow, not because they were harsh, but because they showed the disconnect that existed between me and my own family. They had never seen me the way I saw myself. They saw me as part of the whole, as someone who was there, but they never understood how much that meant to me. I knew there was an invisible wall, but now that wall was being torn down, little by little, with every word I spoke, with every gesture they made to try to get closer. What I realized in that moment was something fundamental. Communication isn't just about words, but about how those words are received and understood. The letter I wrote wasn't just a way to express my disappointment at being ignored. It was a way to allow the other side to understand the depths of my experience, something that, until then, I didn't know I needed to share. But the journey didn't end there. I knew something else needed to happen. I wanted my family to not only understand how I felt, but to learn to appreciate the little things, those everyday moments that, for many, go unnoticed, but that meant the world to me. So I decided I needed to take another step to share my experience even more. I decided to invite my family over for dinner. A simple dinner, nothing fancy, but with a deep purpose, to create a space for us to talk openly. I knew that my mother, father, and brother were trying hard to understand what had happened, but I wanted that effort to be more real, more practical. I wanted them to see that being heard didn't just mean being physically present, but emotionally available. When dinner began, there wasn't much to say. The atmosphere was tense. It was obvious that everyone was trying to find the right words to express how they felt. But instead of allowing the conversation to turn into an exchange of apologies, I proposed something simple but meaningful. I asked, what can we do to ensure that on future birthdays or at any other time we really see and value each other? My mother, who had already taken some steps in our communication, was the first to respond. She said, I, in particular, always get so caught up in my daily obligations that I end up overlooking the little things, the things that really matter. But I promise I'll try to change that. I'll start being more present. Then my dad, in his quiet way, said something I never imagined I would hear. He said, I thought everyone's happiness was automatic, that just by being here, I was doing my part. But now I see that what really matters is being truly together. I'm going to make a bigger effort to connect. It was as if at that moment something had broken inside all of us. It was no longer about the birthday. It was no longer about the day I was forgotten. It was about the transformation that was happening there in those minutes of sincere and unpretentious conversation. My brother, the youngest, always the most distant in emotional matters, also opened up. He talked about how, with the rush of life, he never realized how much the little things made a difference. I knew you were there, he said, but I didn't know that my lack of attention could hurt you so much. And little by little, the words began to have meaning. They were no longer just excuses, but real commitments to change. That dinner marked the beginning of a new phase. I no longer felt invisible, and more importantly, my family no longer saw me as a distant being who was just part of the scenery. They began to see me in a way I never thought possible. They began to understand the value of emotional presence, honest communication, and above all, the simple fact of being present in the lives of those we love. What I learned from this episode was that often the pain we feel comes from a lack of connection, a lack of attention, and a lack of communication. And that, as painful as it may be, sometimes we need to be bold enough to take the first step, to put ourselves in a position where our pain is visible, not to seek blame or revenge, but to create real change. Because in the end, what we all need is to be seen and valued. And the best way to achieve this is often by giving ourselves the chance to express ourselves and become the protagonists of our own story. This was the transformative journey of how a simple gesture of communication can change the way we see ourselves and relate to others. But now, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Have you ever felt invisible at any point in your life? How did you react? Leave your opinion in the comments and share your experience with us. And if this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone you think needs to hear this message about self-worth and the importance of honest communication in our relationships. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here you'll find more exciting stories full of lessons that will touch your soul. Each video is an opportunity to reflect, grow, and transform the way you see the world. And if you want even more inspiration, click on one of the videos appearing on the screen now to dive into another exciting story. See you in the next video.